and fantastic staff. I see Scott on the call, but um, we're going to be talking today about getting energy and infrastructure projects unstuck. And having supervised, from a commissioner standpoint, a financial regulator over Plant Vogel, I can tell you there hasn't been many infrastructure projects in America that big. And it was the project that actually took me down last November because of the impact that it had on rates, and I was taken out in the election after 15 years. So, but I wouldn't change a thing because that project is very important to Georgia's future and to America's future. So I was so glad that we were able to get that done. I want to introduce our speakers today. We've got some really smart people. You heard me talking to Nick about his time on the submarine himself, having been on a boat. And you'll get to hear from him and some of his experience. Andrew Dunn and I go way back, and he's from Charleston. He serves as Energy Solutions and Sales Director for FENECON USA, helping expand the deployment of industrial scale shipping container battery energy storage systems across the U.S. market. And obviously that is a very, very big thing right now. And with the tax credit still available on batteries, it's one of the things that I'm recommending to solar companies, even going back to all of their customers and seeing if they can add batteries to their array. But his work includes bringing the broader FENECON battery system and ecosystem to market, including integrated energy management architecture, controls, microgrids, flexible load orchestration, to help projects move from concept to deployment. He's also the founder and principal of A3 Consultancy LLC, advising across clean energy infrastructure, financing strategy, deployment, execution, public-private coordination, and long-term resilience. He's going to be kind of leading the conversation today as we get started with our other two speakers. He also was an early founder of Southern Current, and Andrew, Southern Current helped us build that solar array for the Gullah Geechee people down on Sapelo Island. Y'all donated the panels for that. I'll always be appreciative for the good work that you guys did there. Thank you very much for that. John Sorensen's the president and CEO of JFS Energy Advisors, and brings extensive leadership experience across utility infrastructure, battery storage, renewable generation, transmission, large-scale project development throughout North America. He's led development and execution across hundreds of megawatts of battery storage and energy infrastructure projects, and advised leading companies on commodity strategy, market development, transmission, and infrastructure development. His practical delivery and owner side advisory experience provides a strong lens into where technically sound projects most often lose momentum and how teams can recover earlier. And we're really talking about getting stuff unstuck today. And I've certainly seen some projects that get stuck in Georgia, but we've had a lot of success at getting projects, moving forward, whether it's massive solar projects, now massive battery projects. We just approved 10,000 megawatts of gas in December before I left the commission. Our final speaker, Nick Fisher, you heard me talking with him earlier, Director of Operations and Commissioning, EPC Project Management Consulting. He leads owner representative services, commissioning strategy, and program delivery across hyperscale and co-location data center developments, another super hot topic. And I'm sitting in Georgia today, and we've got, we have become the data center capital of the U.S., surpassing Virginia now, I guess, with our projects that are planned. He's had over a decade of experience spanning construction, commissioning, and program management. He had leadership roles at Align Data Centers, Snyder Electric, um, and he began his career serving for 10 years in the U.S. Navy aboard submarines. So with that, we're going to get started. I'm going to turn it over to Andrew. And Andrew, looking forward to this. Thanks for putting all this together today.
Thanks, everyone.
I'm working your slides for you, Andrew, so
yeah.
you tell me when to move them.
Right. Yeah, and I was just actually communicating with John because he had joined a Teams link and just a miscommunication. So he's joining here momentarily. If we can just watch out. I told him that we just did the intro, and I'd like to get him in the meeting, and I think he's ready to go. I can provide additional details, but if he calls me back, I'll just let you know. I want to make sure he's a good voice to have here. So yeah, thanks everyone for joining in today, and thanks Tim and United Consulting for bringing this whole lunch and learn event together. Yeah, the whole goal is to keep it practical. One of the reasons I want to make sure and have John involved and keep things grounded in projects that actually get built, infrastructure projects where sometimes they lose momentum. We'll see, and a lot of people out there see. And then it also involves looking at what really helps move things from concept to construction with really less friction overall. So that's the focus overall. And we're going to go through some anchoring questions and really open it up for more discussion and provide different lenses really here from development, operations, hyperscale and data center infrastructure, battery systems and controls and other stakeholders, right? So we have a variety of voices here. So to kick things off, one of the reasons that this really came together was that I've been doing a series of polls around different aspects of the utility ecosystem and different project work. And I did a poll last year at the end of the year, and we looked at what would relate to how projects would move forward or what would make them stall most often. And what we found out in that response from the market was that over half of the respondents were thinking that the utility process and the interconnection and all that, any of that, how it relates to the process with energy projects or when there's energy and power systems involved, that was really creating the biggest drag. And then there's some other considerations around execution and coordination, early planning and coordination. And then also looking at screening and deal quality, so just general quality overall, and then financing and incentives play a big role in certain types of projects. But again, overall, from a utility and planning standpoint, it seemed to be a key takeaway from the market, and not as much of a technology issue, but more around the process, coordination, and planning. All right, so as we get going here into our first question, we're going to go through about 5 or 6 questions. I want to see if I can check in and see if we can get John in the meeting.
And I will ask while you're looking for John. Look, go ahead and ask your questions in the chat, and we'll pull those up at the appropriate time. Could be after a speaker, or it could be at the end. But go ahead and put your questions in the chat for us.
Yeah, and let me go ahead and also provide the 2 emails that we want to use, so I can make sure this meeting invite goes out to John while I continue, because I don't want to slow us down. So I'm actually going to just drop John's email here. We should be fine on timing, and then I'll give you a backup email.
Hey, while you're doing that, I'm going to have Scott Smelter's on the call. Scott, would you just say just a word about United's services that you all are providing? You can just do audio only if you like.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Yeah, for those of you who don't know United Consulting, and I've seen several friends here, Stacy Blakely, Katie Crippen, thanks for joining us. But United Consulting is a 36-year-old environmental, geotechnical, and construction testing firm. We work all across the country, primarily in the Southeast and Southwest U.S. Worked on a number of data center sites and are currently working on data center sites as we speak, providing geotechnical, the environmental, including wetland delineation and wetland permitting, which is a big aspect of the some of those data center sites. And so, yeah, we basically separate ourselves from competition because we send our own people out in the field with a drill rig for geotechnical work. And I like to say our people like to get dirty. They like to go out in the field and do the field work. And then, of course, provide reports and expertise when they get back. So that's our 1 minute little talk. Thanks.
Great.
Thanks for coming.
Thanks so much, Scott. Andrew, are we ready to roll?
Yeah, let's get going. I just, I did the share, to both of John's emails. So, I'll just let you all know if I think there's anything we can do to get him in here in the first couple of questions, but we can get rolling, and Nick and I can definitely address things and get John in when ready. So overall, we want to look at where these projects really would get stuck most often. So I get a variety of perspectives out there between infrastructure and different types of battery systems and other infrastructure. But where overall they're getting stuck most often. So depending on who's involved, early in the process and planning, it really matters whether or not people have experience. A lot of what's happening in the data center world right now comes from experience or people who have the practical knowledge to really be able to get real projects done out there on the ground in the field. So Nick, if we can kind of open up to you here on question one, and then I'll chime in as well. Where would you say you're finding, or in your experience, projects around data centers or different types of power generation typically get stuck most often before they get executed? Have you run into that?
Perfect. Thank you for that, sir. So typically where we've seen it is the project stall right whenever the handoff between vision and executable scope. And honestly, it can depend on the delivery model. The delivery model could be messy. An undefined delivery model could not be able to tell you like who's going to be responsible for this, who's going to be executing this, that, and the other. Additionally, we could have incomplete engineering tied to not incomplete engineering, then we can't do early procurement, right? Anytime that you have an undefined delivery model, you don't really have procurement solidified, and then you also have a power strategy not developed, you're going to be stuck. And whenever you have those sorts of misconceptions or misalignments, the project just fails within the first early stages of the project development.
Absolutely. That makes sense. Yeah, I run into the same thing. And I guess one thing to add, given that the timelines of projects can obviously take multiple years. And so given how different aspects of the markets and policy and regulatory matters change and programs change, this can definitely impact how projects can get stuck or unstuck. Projects that are looked to work on a really tight timeline can sometimes work really well. Sometimes they end up working on a really, really long timeline. And one thing that I would say is in the data center world, which I think some of this audience is interested in, we have really a growing interest in projects moving really quickly through phases. And so you have these handoffs and ownership that's really important throughout the process. But otherwise, the data center world has a lot of stuff happening from modular data centers to larger hyperscale systems where they're needing to be built by groups that in some cases don't have as much experience doing that work, or at least there aren't traditional methods of doing procurement or solicitations. So it's like kind of like contracting and old school construction meets modern technology and the utility grid, in that people are kind of going off the grid, going rogue, trying to build systems. And a lot of the work is being done word of mouth and not through the traditional, the means of procurement and aspects we typically see with the utilities. So I just wanted to add that, some of what I'm hearing from the data center crowd.
Right. And that's absolutely true. I mean, we've seen it on several of our programs that we're supporting where they're essentially barroom napkin deals, right?
Yep.
And it works when you're trying to scale at speed. Or sorry, it works whenever you're just doing one or two projects at speed. However, if you're trying to scale at speed, it no longer works because there can be misconceptions as to what was contractually required for, this equipment to show up on this site. And then now you have 5 sites and maybe they've scaled their team. Those agreements don't necessarily go past that barroom napkin. That's why if you get a structured delivery model that enables early procurement and your power strategy with a controlled risk, you're going to have a successful project. And typically the way that we try to anchor that is going to be including our project controls setup. And when I say project controls, I mean the cost and the schedule support that, along with commissioning. And if you have all that solidified on day one with a experienced team, even if you have subcontractors that have never built before, it can still be a successful project as long as you have that experienced and seasoned guidance in your back end.
Yeah, that's really insightful. Makes sense. And it's definitely true that we see projects that aren't planned, or the napkin math happens, and then those deals typically aren't really aligned for long-term success with those different vendors involved. So it's interesting that you bring that up, because I see both aspects of that happening in these infrastructure projects. You know, the fast word of mouth type deal activity, and then the lack of consistent continuity across different vendors and stakeholders on having the contracting done that really backs up getting involved, and can lead to some of the breakdown that Nick mentioned earlier. So, okay, so we can keep moving here. Tim, if you want to transition over to question number 2, that would be excellent. We'll look at really a little more about what happens in the idea here is to look at the first 30 to 60 days of a project, and how that influences whether or not a project, how it moves forward. And yeah, so if you all don't mind advancing to slide the next question.
Yeah, working on it here.
No worries. And it's just, so the idea is, and Nick, we'll get back going on this one as well. So, which decisions really early on, and we'll circle back on some of the actual stakeholder groups that are involved, but, what decisions that first 30 or 60 days really influence whether a project actually moves forward, considering that you could look at it through the lens of many projects don't end up moving forward in the long run. So.
Right. Good question. So we're actually working on several of these out in the Texas area. But power strategy typically is the first one. I have several developers that approach, and they are saying, hey, how much power do you need? And really it's how much power do you have? And then additionally, how much power can you have in X amount of years? And I'll give a couple of examples here, but for power strategy being defined first, it's absolutely critical, because then, it moves into your procurement strategy, identifying the long lead equipment. And then maybe you can mitigate some of that design and have a little bit more nimble design, so you don't have a design lock, and you can have some procurement ready design packages. And when I mean that, it's more of like it's a general piece of equipment based on a couple targeted design completeness items, like load profiles, the way it interfaces, any sort of performance items, anything that would be in like an OPR or an owner's project requirements for whenever the building gets turned over. Those broad spectrums can have you build a procurement ready design package, and then releasing in phases. If you can release some of that equipment at a 30% or 60% design, and then the balance of design continues on, it can help immensely. And the final thing is, we talked about this a little bit before, but it'd be the delivery model. The delivery model, it'll help you. It'll help the team understand who owns the scope, who owns the risk, the decision making and execution across the entire project life cycles. Because at that point, then you're going to be knowing who's going to be managing the contracts, who's going to be owning cost, schedule, risk, and then how decisions are going to get made and escalated. And therefore, you can have a successful project execution.
Got it. Excellent. And I see we've got John on board now, so that's really good. And I'm glad I didn't have to reference or try to speak to your knowledge around EMS or battery systems, John. But we have started getting into this discussion around the planning process, why projects stall early, the first 30 or 60 days in the process. And something that I've learned since knowing John Sorensen here, who's with us now, is that he has this incredible, elegant ability to have gone out and done all these amazing, robust battery system and infrastructure projects, and it sounds like so much of that work just by making them happen from a safety and a management and an implementation planning standpoint, and then making the system safe and making sure that they could be orchestrated and working correctly. So you could see how early in the process, in the first 30 or 60 days, or in terms of how projects might break or not work, bringing John in this conversation is really, really excellent, because we need to have that voice of how to make projects actually work. So with that, let's keep going, and we'll jump right into, one thing that I've seen most consistently in different types of field work and power systems is that the different stakeholders and having them engage can make or break a project. We talked a little bit about utilities and the interconnection process earlier for different projects that involves, but also just different owners, utilities, community groups, engineering partners, like has been mentioned here, and others. That alignment early is important, or could lead to some drag later in the process. So let's open this up to, I think that these things need to be coordinated usually immediately, but it's a lot of work and a lot of different coordination and knowledge there. So how early do we think the utilities and owners or others key stakeholders need to be engaged in the process? So, John, can we flip this one to you and look at, anything you want to look at related to how early you think the conversation should be happening, whether it's the utilities or the community groups?
Well, again, depends on what type of project we're talking. You guys were initially going down the data center, and I can give you a lot of input there because I'm doing working on 2 data center projects right now, one in Colorado Springs and another one in Connecticut. And both have a very different dynamic. But let's talk about batteries and battery energy storage. And I've been doing with batteries right now, and have sold over 400 megawatt hours of projects, and 3 of those out of those 5 projects were with Dominion Energy. And we got Dominion engaged as soon as we found out the need. In other words, Dominion was they had a need, they put it out in their integrated resource plan. They hadn't even issued the RFPs yet. Due to relationships that I've had with them from way back from the natural gas business, I was contacting them immediately. How do we get involved? Why would I do that? Because again, they do something different than most, and that is they're very focused on safety. They're a utility mindset. Even though this is Dominion Energy, they're owned by the parent, which is Dominion up top. You got a utility to your right, and you got Dominion Energy to your left. But the bottom line is they like the mindset of which we were, which is Hydro-Quebec's subsidiary called Evlo Energy. And so the Evlo Energy product was built on safety. It's built like a Cadillac. It's built like, an armored tank. It's not as cost effective, obviously, because of what we've seen from Asia, right? But the bottom line is it was safe. And so we got them engaged in the process with actually getting involved with the final design. And when you
That freeze.
all of a sudden you get that preferred vendor status. And by doing that is when they went out to bid for the EPCs, engineer, procure, construct, they recommended Evlo Energy as their battery energy storage company. So the EPCs didn't have a choice. They would only work with us. And so of course we were fielding all the calls for the responsors, and basically we were the product that they built in Shands, which is in Stony Creek, Virginia, and now we're in the commissioning process in Dulles, Virginia. Today, I just had another long meeting with them, even though I'm at a conference, and I apologize for the difficulty getting connected, folks. I have no idea what happened, but anyway, I'm here.
Made it.
And again, today, our product is an active passive air ventilation system, which again, Dominion has their fingerprints all over. Panels, extra fire panels inside, extra sensors inside the container, et cetera, et cetera. With that said, we met today with the fire department, the Dulles Fire Department, and again, did a presentation just on fire and safety. So when you get the owner engaged like that, they're going to hold your hand through this process too, and they're going to be supportive. And frankly, they're going to give a little bit more leeway. So we're fortunate in this particular case because we have a relationship with the EPC, but we have a relationship with the owner since the owner recommended us. And that gives us an advantage, if you will, especially when it comes to, as Nick was talking about, procurement of parts and items, the civil side, the financial side, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, in my humble opinion, get engaged.
Yeah, you have so much great experience and clearly ongoing. Thanks, John. Nick, anything you want to briefly add there to timing and who you get engaged early in the process or how that goes? And you're muted still, partner. No.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I thought I left that off. It's okay. So a good thing that I think we can all agree on is if we engage early and we leverage the relationships with with our partners, our team members, and anyone that's going to be supporting that project, if we build a good team culture, we're going to be able to be successful and maybe even mitigating some of the issues that might come up. It's great that John has a really good really good relationship with the owner and with the EPC that he's working with. That can be absolutely critical whenever you're dealing with outside influences like AHJs and city council members, permitting process, so on and so forth. Leveraging those relationships has been instrumental for some of the projects in being successful that we've seen. And sometimes it becomes an entire strategy that the program has to execute to.
Right. Absolutely. It's always good news when there's some engagement early, with the community, or if you like, some communities want to support certain types of projects before you get there and some don't. And in some cases you need to have a whole process of education. They aren't really aware before you get there. So, and like John mentioned, for the different types of projects, it varies. Okay, so we'll keep moving here and we can flip to question 4 as we get into some more fun topics, and we will shift gears a little more into, one of the biggest market changes that we're seeing right now. The shift is towards, we're seeing more behind the meter infrastructure and this real phase deployment strategy that goes alongside with areas like data centers, different types of them, and industrial campuses or other large loads. There's various types of this, came before the big wave of data centers, but it continues. And so with that, we're seeing significantly more battery storage, a lot of on-site generation with power generation, generators, and then a lot more of an off-grid or a semi-islanded type infrastructure. So all of that leads to more of a need for an overall more intelligent energy management system overall, an architecture for controls, and overall just more sophisticated power electronics than most people are familiar with. That has to do with all the different parts and power inverters and everything like that on the different systems. So want to hand this over to Nick to start off with, and then get John's input. What are you seeing in terms of the data center world, or previously or today, for hyperscale data centers or other modular data centers? How do you see that that's really changing project development?
Great question. So you've highlighted a couple of the ways that we've figured out to kind of sort of architect some of those constraints with regards to power becoming more of a program than a project. We've seen success where the teams engage with BESS companies. And then additionally, I mean, it was interesting at several of our conferences last year, there was an SMR discussion, just finding ways they can find other grid opportunities. Sorry, you were saying something?
Sorry to interrupt. No, go ahead.
You're good. You're good. But with the amount and the way that the data centers have started changing the profile of the load from predictable to massive, fast, clustered, it's causing utilities to get overwhelmed quickly. And therefore, the developers are then competing for time, not just capacity. And everyone always has to have that new way of speed to market with that competitive advantage. Again, to echo some of this previously, the relationships that you can build with some of your vendors. And it's great that there's a best supplier, but the other long lead equipment that can help you have that competitive edge could be for your substation transformers. It could be for your generators, your chillers, so on and so forth. Any way that you can figure out a way to turn on this massive computer sooner, the better.
Agreed. Yes, absolutely. And John, anything you want to add there from what you've seen with the data center world, how that's changing things and the overall development process?
Yeah, it's pretty wild. I'm going to be very candid with you. So again, Nick talked about stages and phases. It's important. Let's be really clear. If you're going to try to be grid connected, there's not many places that can take on 500 megawatts of grid capacity at a particular location, but maybe they can take on 45 or 50. So you apply for that 45 or 50. In the meantime, we're having multiple discussions with multiple generators, IPPs, about bringing generation to the site. So we'll get connected. We'll get part of the campus up and running, and with that 45 megawatts, okay, within hopefully the next 2 or 3 years. But in the meantime, we're working on natural gas to the site, working on water to the site, working on all the applicable utilities to the site that could support a 500 megawatt gas-fired turbine. And that will be an island mode unit that basically will then allow the tiers. So the answer is, it's a phased approach, as Nick alluded to. It's really important. You got to understand the dynamics. What are the keys? The keys are, what's the capacity? What are the utilities? What's the water rights? How we're going to use water, and of course all the land and permitting rights as well. So it's complex. It's complex, but it can be done. But it has to be done in phases, unequivocally.
Thanks, John. You all are bringing up some really good points, and I'm sure the audience is appreciating it. I've seen some of these similar trends where you have the 10 or 50 megawatt modular data centers to start things off. You have planning for really large hyperscale data centers in various regions. And I have had more conversations this year about SMRs than most years, which is always interesting. So yeah, I would echo that. And that's around people, people building them. So particularly interesting, right? And so we can jump right into, as we flip over to the next question. John, I want to bring this back to you because it's about a world that we see a lot of. I'm sure Nick does as well, but really particular to your expertise, and looking at how, battery systems, BESS systems, battery energy storage systems, with their controls and the EMS, the energy management system, and the overall site orchestration, how can that help or complicate a project delivery? You can go down the data center pathway, but it's just a lot of your expertise. So how could you see that really helping with or complicating a project delivery?
Well, let's be clear. It's not easy. All right. Connectivity, remote connectivity with an EMS is not easy, because you're dealing with all the cybersecurity related issues. So obviously I can talk Virginia quite well. Well, what's big about Virginia? It's connected to the Pentagon. So do you think they get a few hits on that, both from a internet connectivity and from a utility perspective? You betcha. So I believe the number is 1 million hits a day on the utility system, fraudulent hits per day. So the point being is they're very stringent on the cybersecurity and the connectivity and how that all works. Then you have NERC compliance on top of that. And then, of course, if you have a site controller and an EMS, they have to talk. Now, is the site controller going to control because it's got both the battery and the solar, or is the EMS for the battery system actually going to have more movement? Sometimes it's dumb or a slave because the site controller is doing all the work, or sometimes they're just going to send set points and set signals, and then the EMS for the battery is actually going to do all the work for, like, group control, frequency regulation, things like that. So it does vary. It is complex. Went through this through a tremendous amount of stress all through the holidays. Literally, my New Year's Eve was till 9:45 at night. Again, dealing with these connectivity related issues and how to get it done and how to make that happen. It's not easy, but once it's up and running and once it's flowing, it's great. But and you have a lot of competing interests too. These site controllers want to run things, and then you got the owner who wants this, and there's a lot of conflicting and competing interests, if you will.
Okay, excellent. And we'll talk more about that, and definitely the overall orchestration with batteries and the controls and the way to use the logic to possibly interface them with data centers and scaled data center campuses. That's something we can talk about briefly here. Before that, Nick, on the commissioning operational side, anything you want to add about, how BESS, in particular battery systems, would, help or complicate delivery? And then we'll talk more about the data center applications of that as well.
Good question. So the BESS systems, we haven't had a significant amount of experience in. However, what I could see from upfront was exactly what John was putting on there, or rather bringing in. And I would primarily see that with the commissioning integration. right? How you're actually going to be testing it. And then from my experience at Aligned, what I can also put in is how is a customer going to be able to have visibility to it? Because there's always going to be an owner or a landlord and then a tenant. And then depending on how remote they are, how they can see whatever they need to see can be instrumental or validating, various contractual requirements that they may have.
Got it.
That's
Okay.
where it can be kind of tricky.
Okay. Yeah, very good. Yeah, and I can speak to that as well. Lots of experience with working with different stakeholders for battery systems and microgrids. And with that, let's go ahead and jump into question 6. We'll start winding down these staged questions, which are hopefully helpful, and then it will open up a few minutes to have some discussion, field some of the audience questions. So with the topic of data centers, looking at that and the growth and the electrification that's been accelerated, are there any other changes that you've seen overall, for, since seeing data center growth, electrification, heavy loads? Nick, let's start with you. Do you have any thoughts on that? Any additional changes that you're seeing within the data center world and heavy loads?
Yeah, one that we haven't really touched on yet, and this is with regards to, let's say, a major shift within our industry, has been speed, has overtaken the cost as the primary driver.
Mhm.
That's been massive. It used to be schedule, even before that, it used to be quality with cost and then schedule. Now schedule or speed has overtaken that cost. And what you can do to mitigate some of that is some of these strategies that we've talked about above, utilizing maybe a temporary microgrid or a BESS system or a generator or something of that nature while the utility builds out its infrastructure. But some of that's requiring, the owners, they're being forced to make decisions earlier with less certainty. Includes the equipment procurement being early that may or may not be part of the actual design. And then they just have all of this equipment that maybe they can shuffle over here to this campus instead of this campus based on whatever racks they're putting inside the DC. The power strategy commitments, they're making decisions earlier on. Delivery models, we've talked about that. The capital commitments, those are coming a lot earlier. And then trying to figure out if they want to have a design freeze or be flexible. And that goes with that whole procurement strategy.
Interesting.
That's the biggest change really, though, is other than power strategy and delivery risk,
Yeah.
speed has overtaken cost.
Speed versus cost. Yeah, you listed several really big areas there we're seeing change. And John, aligning the battery strategy and microgrids, what are some of the, what's the biggest changes that you're seeing with that wave?
Technology is changing rapidly. Obviously, we're seeing it in the batteries. We've gone from pouch-based cells, which are, were patented, and now prismatic-based cells, and we're looking at static-based cells. I mean, cell development has moved rapidly. Furthermore, we've seen a lot as it relates to cooling. And now some of the, obviously there's liquid cooling, which again, some of these utilities do not want. But then there's immersion. And so which really makes sense. You're putting the batteries in a coolant. And so we're just seeing a lot of changes in the battery development. Same with EMS, same with the site controllers, again, being able to do more and use these assets. Storage as a transmission asset. You're going to see more and more of that because it's so difficult to site and build transmission. And technology, again, will help do that. So long duration will start to take over. But again, being able to use these things on whether it's a droop, whether it's frequency control, et cetera, to help a utility manage their grid better is really starting to take hold. And so these are the big changes that we're seeing right now.
Great. Love how you connected the battery world, some of what we've seen growing in the battery and infrastructure space, and how it aligns with some of the bigger picture data center market activity that's clear. And what, John, why, if you don't mind briefly, why do some utilities not appreciate the liquid cooled battery systems? This is coming from a battery expert and someone who ships battery containers.
Car radiator. Think of a car radiator. Okay. Okay, what happens? Radiator spills, burns, boom, goes kaboom.
Got it.
And so some of these utilities don't want that.
Got it.
They'll accept it, but they don't want it. Okay.
Got it.
If there are no other alternatives. So
Sure.
they are seeking other alternatives as we
Right.
speak.
Yeah, I did a lot of work in the hydronics space previously, so I can appreciate that, the loops, and definitely that change happens, and we learn sometimes by doing things, previously the way we wouldn't want to do them today. Okay, so we'll do kind of a rapid fire closeout round here with us on question 7, which is really around, seeing if there's any threads, don't have to go too deep. If there's anything that really you think consistently happens that make projects move through to construction. And if we can keep, anything about more of the complex projects, data centers. So if John, if we can start with you on this one, any thoughts on that topic?
Well, you talked about it before, and that's stakeholder engagement. It's important. You got to go down multiple parallel paths. Again, whether it's the community, the owner, the contractor, if you're the supplier, all the your supplies, you've got to go down these multiple paths, and you have to attack them all at once. So it is complex, but the fact of the matter is that helps move projects along.
Right.
It's really, really, really important. And then, of course, overdo on the communication and engagement side. Overdo it. You cannot underdo it. You cannot underdo it.
Over communicate and stakeholder engagement. Yeah, Nick, what you got?
Kind of the same. I mean, I love that John's on the same wavelength here, right? Having that clean ownership, power and procurement locked in early, some sort of realistic base schedule. I know those are a little bit different than what John was saying, but that clear communication help immensely, because what used to be a sequential design, procurement, and then construction is now all happening in parallel, along with any sort of community engagements that's happening. Sometimes that's happening during construction. You're mitigating some issues with the community.
Yeah.
That all of that forces, while we're doing all those same things together, forces earlier decisions with less certainty. So having that right delivery structure and controls in place is absolutely critical. It's what helps the teams that succeed because they aren't avoiding risk. They're structuring it early and managing it deliberately.
Right. Yeah, very good. That experience is really helpful. And, just wrapping up, I'm seeing, the biggest takeaway is the same, strong planning and foresight, being able to mitigate for some things, some downstream risks. And then, once the planning is, you go through that process and go through alignment with utilities, the surrounding community early, and understanding that community, teams can usually move more quickly. And that's when, hopefully that alignment comes in handy. So there's less drag, less friction throughout the process. So with that, Tim, we can open things up and, hand things back over, and hopefully that's a good wrap point.
Yeah, I'd love to have some questions, having regulated Georgia Power and watched well-meaning companies who want to do projects, whether it's some of the new battery stuff that we did or solar. It was especially evident early on in these massive solar projects. These companies, they came in, they put an option on some land, they were bidding into the program, and some of them just didn't have the financial wherewithal to wait around long enough to be able to get the project, because and I think that's where these hyperscalers and some of these other large companies do have an advantage. They've got the balance sheet, they've got the ability to wait. And so in some instances, take with United Consulting, they're doing a lot of teaming owned projects with larger engineering firms, for these massive companies developing these large data centers. So, and I'm not going to give the name of the ones they're working on, but they're some of the largest in the state. Well, I'm looking at some. I don't see any questions in the chat,
Right.
but I'm certainly willing to even entertain some.
Yeah.
We've got Bill Linton on this call, who does a lot of stuff with his own conferences. We've got we've got some others that are in the business. So I'm going to call on Bill Linton and have him. Bill, if you're on, you've worked with Siemens and some of these other large companies. What are your thoughts on, in particular, in South Carolina, where you live?
Well, Tim, I don't have any specific things regarding data centers and batteries. I was visiting with the Columbia Airport yesterday, and they're putting in a new BESS system. They're putting in solar to be over their parking lot, and then a BESS system that will allow them to, I guess, operate if there's a shutdown of the power. So it gives them, more than one benefit. And of course, this has been possible because they already had the project underway. So they've got some subsidies that will be going away now. But we are seeing more BESS systems in South Carolina. I'm hearing this because, South Carolina is pretty strained right now and expects to be more so in the coming few years for producing enough power. So obviously a BESS system doesn't add power to the system overall, but it can provide it when it's needed so that you can use that off time power. The power that's available when you're not running at peak.
Mm-hmm.
So, we're going to see more of those systems. Maybe that's a part in the Southeast. Maybe that's a part of the delay of projects has been that, there wasn't a clear understanding of the demand. But as soon as we get to a place where battery systems can add to that, then I think the demand is going to be there in many cases. Of course, we're going to solve that long term, build more nuclear, build more gas, all of that. Those are just thoughts off the top of my head, Tim. You might respond to anything there.
Yeah, you take companies like Duke, Dominion, Southern Company, they're very PR conscious. Reliability is something they sell as a part of their brand. And these BESS systems have allowed, and I'll just speak for Southern Company and Georgia Power now, they have allowed Georgia Power to be even a more reliable company when you're popping this 80 megawatt battery array onto the transmission system here. You can cover yourself for a little while. If you've miscalculated capacity or you've got an event that happens, the battery helps you keep customers happy because that thing's going to be able to operate for a little while and cover any act of God, act of nature, or miscalculation. Andrew?
Yeah, appreciate that commentary, Tim, and also for the comments about South Carolina. And I'll highlight a little bit about that. We've been involved in the process with the Columbia Airport. There's a great company here in the Charleston area called Stokes Energy, and they do a lot of work with large batteries and microgrids in North America and management of those. And they're collaborating with the EPC to deploy that microgrid. And it's really excellent being able to have the backup power, resiliency, more renewables, the ability to charge vehicles. And what we're seeing is that wave basically taking off across airports as well as naturally around port infrastructure, whether it's along waterways or inland ports, but definitely airports, whether they're small, medium, or large. There's this really active ecosystem of deals happening and planning. And it's kind of new, but it's happening. And if you research how many airports there are around the country, it's really exciting to start thinking about that as resilience hubs. And so South Carolina is a really strong model for looking at that, Columbia, and then different airports. And so really exciting times and looking at the different technologies available. And one other comment about how, you mentioned about the timing and the kind of staying power and the ability to do planning. And usually often businesses want to develop fast and turn over projects. But one experience I've had is with partners working with the oil and gas industry for resiliency and other similar industries. And so they sometimes move fast, but it's more often that they move slow, especially when it has to do with resiliency and things like renewables. But if you stick around with certain types of customers, you can do as much project work as you want, but it has to do with not necessarily always moving really, really fast. So we see that same type of pattern in the data centers. Oil and gas industry was similar for electrification, resiliency, and renewables.
Let's just take the Atlanta airport. As some of you may know, a couple years ago, maybe it was 3 years ago, we had a major outage there due to a fire down in the tunnel, and it shut down the airport And when that happens with that many people in there, I mean, your food service, your airline systems, your climate control system. I mean, it impacted just about everything. And after that horrible experience, the city of Atlanta, who owns that airport, they signed a contract with Power Secure, which is owned by the Southern Company, out of the Research Triangle Park in North Carolina, to basically come in and take over the backup systems in each concourse. And I did a tour down there in the belly of the beast, and they walked me around to some of the old generator systems. And they said, yeah, this company has the key to this one, and this person fuels this one. And it was a hodgepodge of things. And by going with Power Secure, who has an office down in the belly of the beast now, working, of course, very closely with Georgia Power, their sister company. They've got 1 million gallons of diesel on the ground in their generators right there. So it takes it out of the airport's hand and puts it into a company that is a utility, essentially. And these guys they know what they're doing. And that has really, I think, gone a long way to improve the resilience of the Atlanta airport. And you just can't afford for those systems to go down even for 30 minutes. It's catastrophic.
That's right. That backup power is really critical. And one of the things that we're seeing is across multiple states is with this type of infrastructure and with data centers as well as other resiliency, then private companies and IPPs or similar entities can come in and basically host and sponsor those networks, which is really key because of the amount of investment that's actually happening. So you'll see that in the data center world and similar. So I don't know if anyone wants to add anything to that.
Maybe we can just have a wrap up comments from each of our speakers today, John, Nick, and then you, Andrew, and I'll close it out.
It's good.
Well, thank you. And again, apologize to everybody that I was late. I tried like heck to connect and I was having all kinds of difficulties. So I do apologize. Message is really simple. There is a lot of reform out there, both at the state level and at the federal level, to try to improve permitting and processes. And so I think, from a federal government level and a state government level, you're seeing a lot of push towards trying to improve things, so that we can do these data centers, we can do these hyperscale, these projects, because think about it. The Central Hudson transmission line that's going from Quebec to New York City. It's 350-mile line, transmission line, subsea, HVDC. Guess what? 12 years. 12 years. Okay, took 12 years. So the point being is these projects can't continue to take so long. I've had projects in the queue in New England.
As we wrap up.
Yeah, we lost John.
In that area. But permitting reform is critical to making these projects come to fruition. It's critical.
Okay.
So.
Thank you, John.
Thanks, John.
Nick?
All right, I'll keep it short and sweet. So right now, I guess what I can leave everyone with is that the difference today isn't the idea or even the capital. It's whether a team can turn a concept into something that's actually executable early and align the power and procurement with that delivery. Furthermore, echoing back the teamwork aspect of this, we need to keep all parties integrated through pre-construction, construction, and commissioning. That's what ultimately gets projects across the finish line. That's it.
Thank you. And Andrew?
Thanks, Nick. Yeah, so overall, these themes that keep coming up, between planning aligned with proper execution, but also really over communicating and, just being transparent and honest. A lot of this work, deals that are happening, word of mouth, napkin math, that translates to not planned. No design, no anything. So if we can just be doing better than that as we pull the industries forward, it's really exciting times for economic growth and smart technology. So better planning and execution and communications. And thanks again, everyone.
I think the takeaway today is napkin math doesn't cut it. Andrew, thanks. And thanks to United Consulting for hosting this. Thanks everyone for being on this call today. And I look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks all. Have a great day.